Welcome back to TK Tennis. It's been about a month since Wimbledon has ended and Sinner won Wimbledon. And when you combine Sinner's win with all the wins that Alcaraz has, we've had now 7 Grand Slams in a row won by either Sinner or Alcaraz. So in this video, we're going to talk about, can anyone challenge Sinner or Alcaraz that's currently playing or in the future? Now, something to keep in mind as I'm stringing this racket, first, and how I observe tennis professionals on the men's side of the tour is basically, and if you understand how I view the game, this will help you understand why or who I think might be competitive against these two guys in the future and who may not. When it comes to the men's game, the most important attributes that I see in the men's game are speed and agility and mental fortitude and mental maturity. Meaning, can you, on a regular basis, summon up the competitive spirit and mental maturity throughout your career to be able to win Grand Slams? So when it comes to speed and agility, speed is pretty obviously, that's for the most part footwork and foot speed. And then on the second one, agility, it's not just your physical agility in terms of your footwork, it's also your game's agility and how flexible your game is and your strokes are. And a great example there might be comparing someone like Ben Shelton to Jannik or to Novak in the past, especially when he was young, is you see a flexibility and an agility to their actual game and to their strokes. So speed, agility, not just physical agility, but like stroke mechanic agility, really important for precision. And then also mental maturity and mental fortitude or competitive spirit. That's how I see the men's game in terms of, if you can be an elite player and win many Grand Slams, you need to have most of those things. So now that you understand that, you may understand how I view many of these players. So let's talk about all the potential challengers. And I have them in groups. So let's talk about the old guard first. So the old guard would be the former big three, and there's only one left. So that would be Novak. And he's clearly the third best player in the world in Grand Slams. So that's the old guard. And then you have the usual suspects. Most of these guys are the guys that have been born in the 90s. And I call it the lost generation. So the players that have been born in the 90s, I think there's only been 2 players that have ever won a Grand Slam born in the 90s. And that is Medvedev and Dominic Thiem. And everyone else, so we're talking about Tsitsipas, Alexander Zverev, Medvedev, Kyrgios, Dimitrov, that whole generation of players that should win a lot of Grand Slams, or people thought should have won a lot of Grand Slams, and maybe they thought after the big 3 they would have their shot. But now we have the big 2 with Carlos and Jannik. So then we have those usual stuff. So we'll talk about those. And then we have the random threats. Who could be a random threat on the short-term horizon? And these players I look at as Arthur Fils, who's 21. You have Holger Rune, who is 22. Draper, who is 23. Musetti is 23. Kobali, I'm going to throw him in there as well, 23. And you have to think about those players as those random threats on the short-term horizon. Those guys that are getting better, can they compete with Jannik and Carlos for Grand Slam championships? And then we have the Americans. Then in the Americans, you have 2 groups. You have the established Americans, and then you have the up-and-coming Americans. When it comes to the established Americans, you have Fritz, who's 27. You have Tommy Paul, who's 28. Of course, you have Ben Shelton, who's sort of right in the middle, at 22 years old. TFO, 27 years old. Korda, 25 years old. And then the rising Americans, the young guns on the American side, which I view for the most part as people who are getting better and might be a challenge in the future, is Mickelson. I just heard it called Mickelson today, but it's always been called Mickelson, so I'm not sure what the exact pronunciation there is. And then you have Lerner Tien, who is 19, as the rising American stars. So we'll talk about them as well. And then you have the rising stars outside of the Americans, which the number one hyped player is, of course, João Fonseca, or I'm going to call it Joe Fonseca, because I heard Dimitrov when I was watching them practice. It seems like everyone calls Joe Fonseca. So Joe Fonseca is 18. And then you have Jakub Mensik from Serbia, from Novak's home country, who is 19. And I'm going to throw Tien in there as the American at 19. These are the rising stars. I may have missed someone. If you think that I missed someone, let me know. But I think these are the 3 guys that you might need to watch out for. And of course, Fonseca is getting a lot of hype. And I'm going to have a lot to say on Fonseca in an individual video coming up next. And then you have potential rising juniors. Now, I've looked through, I don't pay that a close attention to the juniors, but there's 2 that have stood out that are playing on the ATP on a semi-regular basis right now. And they are, the first guy is Ivan Ivanov, who's ranked currently 815 in the world, and he's 16 years old, and he just won Junior Wimbledon. I've watched some videos of his game, and he seems to have the characteristics and the attributes that might make him a contender in the future. And then there's Justin Engel from Germany. He's currently ranked 225, and he's only 17 years old. So somebody to watch out for as well, Justin Engel. And he's had some really nice results on the ATP Tour earlier this spring. So now let's talk about the predictions. Who do I think can compete with Alcaraz and Sinner? So let's talk about first the one-time wonders, maybe 2-time wonders, the occasional one-time Grand Slam winners. We've seen them a lot in the past with Dominic Thiem, Andy Roddick, and many other players who once in a while things fall their way, they're playing great, and they're able to win a Grand Slam. So out of those one-time wonders, maybe 2-time wonders, you have to put in, you're talking about, obviously, Wawrinka won 3 times. So let's first talk about the older guys, and a couple older guys have been around for a while. Zverev and Fritz. First off, Zverev was always thought to be able to win a Grand Slam. He's been in 3 finals, and he's lost them all. And can he win and be a one-time wonder? He certainly could. He could be even a 2-time wonder, but it's not going to be on his terms, right? If Zverev's going to win, number one, he has to get back in form. He has the serve, and he has the game to beat all the players he should beat, and then potentially challenge Jannik or Carlos. So he's, should have won a Grand Slam by now, but he hasn't. So he's a potential one-time wonder. Still, if he finds his form again, and if everything falls his way, but it's not in his control. It will take some good circumstances for him to be able to win a Grand Slam, meaning maybe Carlos is injured or not playing well or is sick, and the same thing goes for Sinner. Maybe they're not in top form, or they're injured, or maybe they get sick, and things just fall his way. Now you can say the same thing about Fritz. Fritz has been to a couple finals, I know at least one, but Fritz's game is also a little bit one-dimensional. He's a hell of a competitor, but his game and his attributes don't meet the elite requirements in terms of speed and agility. He's a fabulous player, and he's a fabulous competitor. So is Alexander in the past. He has been as well. But these are the 2 guys that could be, if everything falls their way, one-time Grand Slam winners. And then I look at maybe guys like Draper and Shelton. So Draper, who is, I believe, 23, he's got a big game. He's a bully. He doesn't have, or I should say, he doesn't have the elite level of speed and agility, but he has a really big game, and he could potentially win a Grand Slam. And the same thing with Shelton. Shelton's game, you look at his game, he doesn't have the precision that's needed to be a multi-time Grand Slam champion, but with his power, and if he continues to improve, he could win a Grand Slam. I look at Ben Shelton as this generation's Andy Roddick, that he might win a Grand Slam, he might make it to some finals as he gets a little bit older. He has, just like Andy Roddick, a huge serve, a great forehand, or a big forehand, and okay backhand. But everything about Ben's game, nothing about Ben's games speaks about agility. Not his movement is not agile, and his stroke mechanics are certainly not agile. And I think that's what's going to keep him from winning a Grand Slam. So if he does win a Grand Slam, he's going to have good fortune as well, or just be playing out of his mind, because he doesn't possess the agility in his game to be an elite player. And again, you may disagree, and you may not like that I'm calling this out, but these are my predictions. You don't have to appreciate them, but that's how I view the game, and I just don't see Ben winning a Grand Slam other than potentially being a one-hit wonder. And then let's talk about the long-term challengers. Are there any big 3? If there's going to be another big 3 or big 4, who could that be? Well, you look at, of course, Holger Rune. He has all the abilities to be as good as Sinner and Carlos in terms of physical gifts, but in terms of mental attributes, he's just not mentally mature. He never has been. I don't know if that's been coddling from his childhood, but he doesn't have the mature professional view of the world and of his career that he needs to. I know he wants to, and because he knows physically he can be just as good as those guys, but he also has the competitive spirit that those guys have as well, but he just can't channel it on a regular basis. And that's a problem when you're looking at someone like Holger. So he should be a long-term challenger, but unless he goes through a major transformation into becoming an adult mindset, having an adult mature mindset, and not sort of enjoying the journey and not seeking the results, he's not going to get there. So, but he is a potential barely at this point. It's getting a little bit late. I know he's young. I think he's only 21 or 22, but that's starting to get late in order to win Grand Slams and certainly to be a multi-time Grand Slam champion. So then you move on to guys like Jakub Mensik. He has all the game and the physical attributes, maybe not the elite level speed and agility, but his game is pretty agile for as big as he is, sort of like an Alexander Zverev with more agility, I would say, or at least as much in a bigger game, certainly as big of a game as someone like Shelton with a lot more variety to his game and to his agile physical stature than someone like Shelton does. So Mensik is a really viable candidate to be a multi-time Grand Slam winner and challenge those guys. But the problem what I've seen with Mensik is he doesn't have that competitive spirit. He has never voiced and you've never seen him have that true elite fire and competitive spirit on a regular basis like you used to see, and you still do see, with Novak when he was 19. If you compare Mensik to Novak, both from Serbia, both 19 years old, Novak was playing in the US Open Finals against Roger Federer and should have won that match in 2007. And his competitive spirit, even when he was 18, 17, 16, was very evident. And he had that elite level of desire that I have not seen from Mensik. So I don't think Mensik's going to be a multi-time Grand Slam champion. If it is, maybe one or two, depending if he continues to get better and if he really wants it. But I haven't seen that yet. And then you have long-term challenges. Potentially Draper is there as a long-term challenger, or in and out, but I don't see him being a multi-time Grand Slam champion. Again, one or two potentially if things fall his way, but it's not in his control. And then what everybody thinks is the biggest long-term challenge to make a big three, now that Rune doesn't seem to be that guy, of course, is Joe Fonseca. 18 years old, from Brazil, a lot of hype, huge forehand, really good competitive spirit, and everybody thinks he's maybe the next big three. I'm going to have a lot to say about Joe Fonseca. Maybe the Brazilians won't like it, maybe they will. But let me do an independent video on Joe Fonseca because everyone has him pegged as that next guy to really challenge Carlos and Jannik. And maybe he is, and maybe he is not. So that's my thoughts there. So to answer the question, are there any really long-term threats or any real threats on a regular basis to Carlos and Jannik? And the answer to that is no, there's not. Not that's at least on the radar now. There's no one on a regular basis that's going to challenge these two guys. Now, the benefit the rest of the field has, it's only two guys and not three or four. In the past, you had Wawrinka for a while, then you had Murray for a while, and who am I leaving out? But you had other guys that you also had real abilities that were sapping up a few Grand Slams here and there. Now, because it's just two players, if one of them gets injured or they have a bad year for some reason, there could be guys that win Grand Slams. But challenging these two guys, because both of these guys, Carlos and Jannik, have elite level speed. They have elite level agility, both in their footwork and their physical attributes, but also in their stroke mechanics. And they also have elite level mental fortitude and competitive spirit, just like true elite champions of the past. So Federer, Nadal, Novak, Sampras, they have an elite level of competitiveness that most people, these guys are, I look at them as freaks. I don't want to put anyone else down. I'm not putting anyone down. being on tour is really, really difficult. Traveling, the constant traveling, just playing tennis, waiting around to play your matches, always being up for your matches. I don't blame any player, let's say a Frances Tiafoe, for example, as one, and let's take someone like Musetti, and let's talk about Musetti for a minute. Musetti, a lot of people have him pegged as maybe because he has a beautiful game, or people think he has a beautiful game, but Musetti doesn't have both. He's missing a little bit of competitive spirit on an everyday basis, and he can't bully people around as much. He's on the defense a lot, and he gets pushed off of the baseline, and obviously the one-hander in most cases is a disadvantage. So you got a guy like Musetti who doesn't seem to have that true elite desire, and his game has some flaws in it. You may think his game is beautiful, but he's not Roger Federer. His game may, in some ways, some people may think it looks like it because it also has some, beauty to it. I personally don't think so as much, and I don't think he's anywhere near in terms of Roger was mentally and in terms of Roger's stroke mechanics. Roger had an incredibly agile game, and while you can say Musetti did as well, Roger's game was also more brute force, and he could bully people around with finesse. Believe it or not, you can bully people around with finesse, and Musetti does that at times, and with his forehand power and his exceptional serve. So Musetti is no Roger Federer. So then you have the guys like, that I said, of course, you have Tiafoe, who's not quite there. Doesn't have the agile game, doesn't have the true competitive spirit to be a champion, or the consistency that you need throughout your career to really be a contender. And I don't blame any of these guys that can't do that. Fritz does. Someone like Fritz has great outlook on how he approaches the game and how he's able to get himself up for all the big matches. And again, it's really hard. You have to wait around for a lot of matches, and you have to be ready to perform against some incredible competition. But Fritz is sort of an overachiever, and he is an incredible competitor. So while he's missing some attributes, his competitive spirit to beat all the guys he should beat is really, really high and at an elite level. He just can't beat two guys.